Julian Croft had erased his wife in 12 minutes. He had stood on the polished granite stage of the Beaumont Grand Ballroom, under lights so hot they felt like a judgment, and delivered the keynote address for the unveiling of the Albers Tower. He spoke of vision, of structure, of the unyielding pursuit of a singular aesthetic. He used the word I 47 times. He used the word we twice, both times in reference to his partnership with the city. He did not use the name Alara once. This was not an oversight. It was a statement. He had built the Albers Tower. He had secured the legacy. She had, in his carefully curated narrative, been an observer, a supportive spouse, an elegant fixture at his side. The truth was a more complex and inconvenient geometry, a truth he had decided to sand down and polish away. The consequence of this erasure arrived precisely 14 hours later, not as a storm, but as a quiet, surgical incision. It came in the form of a phone call from Kenji Albright, the senior partner of the consortium that had financed the entire $2 billion project. Albright's voice was not angry. It was worse. It was funereal. It held the sound of pity. "The Kaito deal is dead, Julian," Albright said. The line was so clean, so devoid of preamble, that for a moment Julian thought it was a joke. Then Albright delivered the 5 words that broke the foundation of his world. 5 words that would echo for the rest of his life. She was the one they trusted. And with that, the chase began. The chase to understand not where she had gone, but what she had been. By the way, wherever in the world you're watching from right now, let me know in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories reach. Okay, where were we? The call had ended without ceremony. Julian was left holding a phone that felt as inert and heavy as a block of stone. He was standing in his office, a space he had designed to be a monument to clarity. A vast pane of glass looked out over the city, the Albers Tower itself visible in the distance, a shard of obsidian and steel against the morning haze. The office was minimalist to the point of monasticism. A black desk, a single chair for him, 2 less comfortable ones for visitors. No photos, no clutter. It was a room that declared its occupant needed no external validation. The declaration, in that moment, felt like a lie. He had spent the previous evening soaking in the resonant applause of the gala. It was the sound he lived for, the confirmation of his own narrative. Alara had been there, of course. She had stood just to the side of the stage as he spoke, her expression as serene and unreadable as ever. She wore a dress the color of a deep twilight, a simple column of silk that made the other women in their glittering architectural gowns look overwrought. He remembered catching her eye once during his speech. He had expected to see pride, or at least the placid contentment she usually projected at these events. Instead, there was something else, a stillness, a finality. He had dismissed it then as a trick of the light. After the speech, as champagne flutes chimed and a string quartet sawed away at something modern and dissonant, several people had approached her. He had watched from across the room, engaged in a performative conversation with the mayor. He saw Mr. Kaito's young representative, a man named Satoru, bow to her deeply. He saw her speak to him for no more than a minute. Her hands were still, her posture relaxed. Satoru listened with an almost religious intensity, nodded once, and then bowed again before melting back into the crowd. Julian had felt a flicker of annoyance. She was supposed to be a reflection of his own light, not a source of it. He had made his way over to her, his hand landing on the small of her back in a gesture that looked like affection, but was, in fact, an act of repositioning. "Darling," he had said, his voice a low command. The mayor wants to congratulate us." He had steered her away from the quiet gravity she seemed to effortlessly generate. She had not resisted. She had simply allowed herself to be moved, a beautiful silent object. The last words he had spoken to her were, "You look perfect tonight." He had meant it as the highest compliment. He realized now, with the dead phone in his hand, that he had been describing a statue. A structure is not a home. It was an old aphorism of hers, something she had said years ago when they were looking at one of his early brutalist designs. He had found it sentimental and naive. He built things that lasted, things that commanded a skyline. Homes were messy, compromised, filled with the chaos of living. He preferred the clean, unassailable logic of a blueprint. Now the words returned to him, not as a memory, but as a diagnosis. He tried to call her. The phone went straight to her voicemail, a recording she had made years ago. Her voice, calm and professional, without any of the false warmth people usually affected. He hung up. He told himself she was at the gallery, or the library, or one of the dozen other quiet, studious places she went to fill her days. He told himself the Kaito deal had collapsed for some mundane regulatory reason, and Albright was just looking for a scapegoat. He spent an hour telling himself these things, pacing the cold concrete floor of his office, arranging the facts to suit his own comfort. But the facts would not stay arranged. At 10 a.m., a second call came. It was from a developer in Dubai, a man with whom Julian had been negotiating a new waterfront project for 6 months. The man was blunt. "We are pausing the engagement," he said. Julian demanded to know why. The man was evasive. "There are concerns about stability." An hour later, a third call. A foundation that had commissioned him to design their new European headquarters, a project that was already past the initial design phase. "We are exercising the termination clause in our contract," the woman on the phone said, her voice clipped and legal. "We will pay the kill fee, of course." This was not a coincidence. This was a cascade, an orchestrated, systematic dismantling of his world. He looked out the window again at the Albers Tower. It looked different now, not like a monument, but like a tombstone. He grabbed his keys and left the office, walking past his assistant without a word. He needed to go home. He needed to see the space she had left. The drive to their penthouse apartment was a blur of automatic movements. The building was one of his own designs, a slender residential tower that had won him a prestigious award 5 years earlier. He had called it the Locus. He and Alara had the top 2 floors. It was a showpiece, a 3-dimensional advertisement for his brand. The elevator opened directly into their living room, a cavernous space with 20-foot ceilings and a wall of glass overlooking the park. The first thing he noticed was the silence. It was a different kind of silence than the one he cultivated in his office. His office was silent by design. This was silent by absence. It was the silence of a held breath. The air itself felt thinner. He called her name. "Alara?" The word was swallowed by the sheer volume of the room. There was no answer. He walked through the apartment. Everything was in its place. The art on the walls, minimalist and challenging. The furniture, sculptural and uncomfortable. The books on the coffee table, arranged in a perfect overlapping fan. It was his world, his aesthetic. She had lived within it, a ghost in his machine. He went to her closet first, a vast walk-in space that was more like a boutique. Her clothes were still there, racks of them organized by color. Her shoes, dozens of pairs, lined up on glass shelves like museum artifacts. A wave of relief washed over him. She hadn't packed. This was temporary, a fit of pique. She would be back. Then he saw it. On the small, upholstered bench in the center of the room, It was not a note. It was a single object. A used train ticket. It was for a midnight departure the previous night, bound for a town he had never heard of, a place called Havenwood, some 300 miles north. And beside the ticket, a small velvet bag. He opened it. Inside was the necklace he had given her for their 10th anniversary, a waterfall of diamonds from a famous Parisian jeweler. It had cost more than a house. He had presented it to her at a dinner in their honor, enjoying the flash of the cameras and the murmurs of admiration from their friends. He remembered she had thanked him quietly, her fingers tracing the cold stones, her expression unreadable. He went back into the main living area, his heart now beating a hard, irregular rhythm. He started to look not for what was there, but for what was not. Her laptop was gone from its place on the small desk in the corner where she managed their social calendar. The top drawer of that desk was empty. It was where she kept her personal stationery and her passport. He went into their bedroom. On her nightstand, the collection of poetry she had been reading was gone. The silver frame photo of her late parents was gone. In the bathroom, her toiletries were gone, but not all of them. Only the specific, essential things. The expensive perfumes and lotions he bought her were all still there. The simple, unscented soap she preferred was gone. This was not an emotional flight. This was an extraction, a planned, precise, and devastatingly quiet departure. She had taken only what was truly hers, what held meaning for her. And she had left behind everything that was part of the performance of being Mrs. Julian Croft. The clothes, the jewels, the life he had built around her. She had shed it all like a skin. He sat down on the edge of their perfectly made bed. The scale of his miscalculation was beginning to dawn on him. He had seen her as an object, a beautiful, passive element in his own design. He had failed to understand that she was her own architect. And while he had been building towers of glass and steel, she had been building something else entirely. An escape. The phone rang again. It was his office. His assistant, sounding panicked. "Julian, it's Marcus Thorne on the line for you. He says it's urgent." Marcus was his partner, his number two, the man who handled the operational side of the firm while Julian handled the vision. Marcus was loyal, efficient, and utterly unflappable. If Marcus was panicked, the world was truly ending. Julian took the call. "What is it?" "Julian, thank God. Are you okay? Have you heard from Alara?" Marcus's voice was tight with manufactured concern. "No. What's going on?" "The Kaido deal. Albright's people are saying Alara advised them against it. They said she had grave reservations about our projections. And the Dubai project? Apparently Alara had dinner with Sheikh Al-Jamil's daughter last month in London. They're old school friends. Word is, Alara expressed a lack of confidence in our firm's internal controls." "Julian, what the hell is happening? It's like she's systematically poisoning every well we have." Julian said nothing. He looked at the train ticket on the bed. He had assumed she was fleeing from him, a purely personal act of rebellion. But Marcus's words painted a different picture. This wasn't just about their marriage. This was about the firm. His firm. His legacy. "She's not poisoning them, Marcus," Julian said, the words tasting like ash. "She's telling them the truth." He didn't know what that truth was, not yet. But he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that Alara never lied. She simply stated facts that others were not prepared to hear. "What are you talking about?" Marcus demanded. "I have to go," Julian said, and hung up. He thought back to Albright's words. She was the one they trusted, not him. The visionary, the master builder, her, the quiet woman in the twilight-colored dress. He had spent a decade building an empire of glass and steel. an empire of reputation and awe. He had confused the structure for the foundation. The foundation, it turned out, was not his talent or his ambition. It was her. It was the quiet, invisible network of trust she had built and maintained while he was busy accepting awards. And now she had withdrawn it, all of it, in a single, silent, devastating move. He stood up and walked to the wall of glass overlooking the city. He saw the buildings, the monuments to his own ego. He had always seen them as proof of his strength. Now he saw them for what they were: hollow, brittle. A structure is not a home. He finally understood. His life, his career, this very apartment, it was a magnificent, empty structure. And she had been the one, the only one, who had ever made it feel like a home. And he had driven her out. The chase was on. He had to find her. Not to bring her back, not anymore. He had to find her to understand how he had become so blind. He picked up the train ticket. Havenwood. It was a starting point. It was the first breadcrumb in a trail he knew she had left for him. A trail designed not to be followed, but to be learned from. He made a call, not to the police, not to his lawyers. He called a number he had not used in over 8 years. A man named Corbin. Corbin was not a detective in the traditional sense. He was a specialist in discreet information retrieval. He found people who did not want to be found, and he did it without leaving a trace. "Corbin," Julian said when the man answered. "Julian Croft." Corbin's voice was low and gravelly, unchanged by the years. "I was wondering if I'd ever hear from you again. What's the trouble?" "My wife is missing." There was a pause. "People like your wife don't go missing, Mr. Croft. They leave." "Yes," Julian admitted, the word a surrender. "She left. I need to find her. Quietly." "Where do I start?" Julian looked at the ticket. A town called Havenwood. She took a train there last night. "I'll have a car for you in 30 minutes, Corbin said. "And I'll have a preliminary file on the town and its transportation hubs by the time you're on the road. Do you want me to send my people?" "No," Julian said, the decision forming with absolute clarity. "I'm going myself." "This is a mistake," Corbin said, not as a warning, but as a professional assessment. "Your state of mind is a liability." "It's the only asset I have left," Julian replied, and ended the call. He was going to follow her trail, step by step. He was going to walk through the ruins of his own making and, for the first time, pay attention. The drive north was a study in controlled dissociation. Julian sat in the back of an anonymous black sedan, the kind that blends into the background of power, and watched the city dissolve into suburbs, then into the muted greens and browns of the countryside. Corbin had been as good as his word. A tablet lay on the seat beside him, displaying a concise file. Havenwood. Population 4,821. Primary industries. Defunct lumber mill. Burgeoning arts community. It was a place that had died and was attempting a quiet rebirth. There was one train station, a historic brick building recently restored. The midnight train from the city was the last arrival of the day. From there, the trail went cold. No rental cars in her name, no hotel bookings, no credit card activity within a 50-mile radius. She had stepped off that train and vanished into the town's quiet ecosystem. Corbin's voice came through the car's speaker system, a disembodied presence. "The ticket was purchased with cash 2 weeks ago. The name on the ticket was Eleanor Vance, her mother's name." "She's been planning this for at least 2 weeks," Julian murmured, more to himself than to Corbin. "Longer than that, I'd wager," Corbin replied. "This has the feel of a multi-stage, long-term plan. People who run on impulse leave a messy trail. This is clean, surgical. She wants you to follow, but she wants you to do the work. Julian thought about the name, Eleanor Vance. It wasn't just a pseudonym. It was a reclamation. Alara had been born Eleanor. She had started calling herself Alara in college, a name she'd found in a book of obscure constellations. He had loved it. It sounded sleek, modern, otherworldly. It fit the brand. Now he realized it was just another part of the costume. By using her mother's name, her birth name, she was signaling a return to something more fundamental. They arrived in Havenwood just after noon. The town was exactly as the file had described it, a core of handsome but weathered 19th century brick buildings surrounded by modest clapboard houses. It was quiet, the air crisp and smelling of pine and damp earth. The driver took him directly to the train station. It was a small, beautifully preserved building, more like a museum than a transport hub. A single track ran past it, disappearing into the dense forest on either side. Julian got out of the car. "Wait here," he told the driver. He walked into the station's small waiting room. It was empty, save for an elderly man behind the ticket counter reading a newspaper. The man looked up over his spectacles as Julian approached. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for someone," Julian began. "A woman who would have arrived on the midnight train last night." He described Alara, her height, her dark hair, the quiet way she held herself. The man listened patiently, then shook his head slowly. "Son, the midnight train had maybe 4 people on it. An old couple visiting their grandkids, a young fellow with a backpack, and a man I know, Thomas Abernathy. No woman like the one you're describing." Julian's confidence wavered. Had he been wrong? Was this a dead end? A deliberate misdirection? "Are you sure?" "I've been working this counter for 35 years, the man said, his tone not unkind. "I notice who comes and goes. Thomas is a regular. He's a retired judge, lives up on the north side of town. Takes the train down to the city once a week for his chess club. Always comes back on the midnight train. But no woman." Julian felt a familiar surge of frustration, the impatience of a man whose will was being thwarted. He was about to turn away, to call Corbin and admit defeat, when a detail snagged his attention. A chess club. Alara's father had taught her to play chess. She was ruthlessly good at it, though she rarely played. She said it was too much like his work, all strategy and no heart. "This man," Julian said, forcing his voice to remain calm. "Thomas Abernathy. You said he's a retired judge?" "That's right. Good man. Fair man." "Where could I find him?" The ticket agent gave him a wary look. "Depends why you're looking." Julian made a choice. For the first time in a long time, he chose not to command or intimidate. He chose a sliver of honesty. "My wife, she left me. I think she may have contacted him. I just want to know that she's safe." The words felt foreign in his mouth, but they were true. At the heart of his anger and his wounded pride, there was a kernel of genuine fear for her. The man's expression softened. He gave Julian a simple address. "It's about a mile's walk, up the hill. A small stone house with a blue door." Julian thanked him and walked out into the cool air. He waved the car away, telling the driver to wait at the small inn at the edge of town. Corbin's voice crackled through his earbud. "What are you doing? Get in the car." "I'm going to walk," Julian said. "This isn't a pilgrimage, Croft. It's an intelligence-gathering exercise." "Maybe it's both," Julian said, and took the earbud out. The walk up the hill was steep. The air was thin and clean, a stark contrast to the filtered, recycled air of his life in the city. The houses were modest but well-kept, with gardens full of late autumn flowers. He was an intruder here, a man of sharp angles and hard surfaces in a world of soft edges and organic growth. He felt clumsy, oversized, his expensive Italian shoes slipping on the damp leaves that littered the sidewalk. He found the house easily, a small, solid cottage built of local stone, with a slate roof and a door painted a cheerful, defiant blue. There was a simple wooden bench on the small porch. Sitting on that bench was a man in his late 70s, with a shock of white hair and eyes that were a startlingly pale blue. He was holding a beautifully carved wooden chess piece, a knight, turning it over and over in his long, elegant fingers. He watched Julian approach without surprise, as if he had been expecting him all along. "Mr. Croft," the man said. His voice was calm and resonant. "I am Thomas Abernathy. I wondered how long it would take you." Julian stopped at the foot of the porch steps. "You know who I am." "She told me you were a man who appreciated efficiency. She said you would likely be here by midday." The judge smiled faintly. "You are 40 minutes late." Julian felt a dizzying sense of dislocation. He was no longer the one in control. He was a piece on a board, being moved by an invisible hand. "You saw her? On the train?" "I did," Thomas said. "We sat together. We played a game of chess. She won, of course. She plays a very disciplined game, patient. She waits for you to make a mistake." He looked directly at Julian, and the observation landed with the weight of a court ruling. "Where is she?" Julian asked, the question raw. "She is safe," the judge replied. It was not a platitude. It was a statement of fact. He said it with the same finality with which he might have delivered a verdict. "That is the first thing she wanted you to know, that you should not worry for her physical safety." "Safe where?" Julian pressed. "That is not for me to say. My role in this was simple. I was to meet her on the train. I was to provide a friendly face, a witness to her journey. And I was to give you this when you arrived." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, old-fashioned brass key. It was attached to a simple paper tag. On the tag, a number was written in neat black ink. 412. "What is this for?" Julian asked, taking the key. "It's for a locker at the city's main public library," the judge explained. "The one on the Grand Plaza. She said you would know it. You designed the West Wing addition 10 years ago." Of course. Another piece of his own world, repurposed by her. A building he had shaped, now holding a secret he needed to unlock. "Why all this?" Julian asked, a genuine plea for understanding in his voice. "Why this game?" The judge looked down at the chess piece in his hand. "She did not strike me as a woman who plays games, Mr. Croft. She strikes me as a woman who builds systems. She told me she was concerned about protecting the innocent. She said there were people who had placed their trust in her, and she could not abide that trust being broken." He looked up again, his pale eyes pinning Julian in place. "She also said that you were a man who only paid attention to things when they were part of a puzzle you needed to solve. So she has made herself a puzzle." The truth of it was so sharp, so accurate, it took Julian's breath away. He had always loved puzzles, blueprints, systems. He loved things he could figure out, dominate with his intellect. He had never thought to apply that same focus to his own wife. He had simply assumed he already knew everything there was to know about her. "Thank you," Julian said, the words feeling inadequate. "Do not thank me," the judge said, standing up. "I am merely a custodian. She has a great many friends, Mr. Croft, more than you imagine. People who value her for her quiet attention, for the way she listens. People who trust her. You would be wise to remember that." He gestured toward the path back down the hill. "You should go. You have a long drive ahead of you, and a great deal of work to do." As Julian turned to leave, the judge said one last thing. "Mr. Croft, she asked me to tell you something. 11 words." Julian froze. He thought of Albright's call. She spoke 11 words. He turned back. "What is it?" The judge's expression was unreadable. "A structure is not a home, but it can be." It was not an accusation. It was an invitation, a possibility, a single ray of light in the wreckage. Julian walked back down the hill, the small brass key clutched in his hand. The world felt different now. The pieces of his life, which had seemed so solid and immutably his, were being rearranged before his eyes. Alara was not just running from him. She was running toward something. She was protecting people. And she was forcing him, step by painful step, to see the world as she saw it. A place not of structures, but of connections. A place built not on power, but on trust. The key in his pocket felt heavy, a single solid link in a chain he was only just beginning to perceive. The next stop was the library, his library. He had built the wing, but she, it seemed, had built the lock. And now he had to prove he was worthy of finding what was inside. The drive back to the city was a silent 4-hour meditation on the past decade. Julian sat in the dark stillness of the car and replayed his life with Alara, but this time, he tried to see it through the lens of what Judge Abernathy had told him. He had met her at a university reception. He was the celebrated young architect, fresh off his first major prize. She was a doctoral candidate in architectural history, working as an archivist in the university's rare books library. He had been cornered by a fawning dean, and he had seen her across the room, standing alone by a dusty display case, looking not at the people, but at the room itself, at the way the evening light fell through the tall arched windows. He had extricated himself and approached her. He had expected her to be impressed by him. Instead, she had been interested in his opinion of the building they were in. It was designed by a student of Louis Kahn, she had said, her voice soft but clear. He understood that the light was the true material. The stone is just there to hold it. Julian had been captivated. He talked about buildings as objects, as sculptures. She talked about them as experiences, as vessels for human life. She saw things he didn't. She paid attention to the invisible architecture of a space, the acoustics, the flow of human traffic, the emotional texture of a room. He had been intellectually enthralled. He had also, he now admitted to himself, seen her as a valuable, untapped resource. Her insights were unique, poetic. They were the kind of thing that sounded profound in client meetings and award speeches. He had courted her with the same focused intensity he applied to a design competition. He had won. And once he had won, he had, in the most profound and gradual way, stopped listening. He had absorbed her way of seeing, co-opted her language, and presented it to the world as his own. The line between his ideas and hers had blurred, and he had been happy to let it. He would come home from a difficult meeting, describe the problem, and she would listen, her head tilted slightly, and then offer a simple, devastatingly insightful observation that would unlock the entire puzzle. He would take that insight, build on it, and call the resulting triumph his own. He hadn't even seen it as theft. He had seen it as collaboration. But a collaboration in which he was the sole author. And the trust. He thought of the Kaito deal. Mr. Kaito was an elderly, traditional Japanese industrialist. He had been skeptical of Julian's bold, almost aggressive designs. Julian had spent months trying to win him over with data, with models, with projections. Nothing worked. Then, at a dinner, Ilara had sat with Mrs. Kaito. They had not talked about architecture. They had talked about gardens. Ilara had spent a week at the library researching traditional Japanese garden design, the concepts of shake, borrowed scenery, and wabi-sabi, the beauty of imperfection. She spoke with Mrs. Kaito about the importance of harmony between the man-made and the natural. The next day, The deal was his. He had thanked Ilara, of course. He had bought her a bracelet. He had never once considered that the Kaitos had made a deal not with Croft Associates, but with the wife of its founder. He had not understood that their trust was placed in her quiet wisdom, not his loud genius. The car pulled up in front of the city's main public library. It was after dark now, and the grand stone facade was uplit, a temple of knowledge. He had always been proud of the West Wing, a seamless blend of glass and steel that respected the original neoclassical structure. He had called it a dialogue between eras. Ilara had quietly called it an argument where the new building shouts and the old one politely clears its throat. He had laughed at the time. He wasn't laughing now. He told the driver to wait and went inside. The main reading room was hushed, filled with the soft rustle of turning pages and the low hum of fluorescent lights. The bank of lockers was in a basement corridor. He found number 412 and inserted the brass key. The lock turned with a satisfying click. Inside the locker was a single object, a book. It was a slim volume bound in worn, dark green leather. There was no title on the spine. He took it to an empty carrel and opened it. It was a collection of poems by a poet he'd never heard of. Tucked inside the front cover was a pressed flower, a delphinium, its blue petals faded but perfectly preserved. He remembered the wildflower bouquet he had bought for her on their third date, a clumsy last-minute purchase from a street vendor. It had been full of them. He hadn't thought of it in years. She had. He turned the pages. Most were blank. But near the middle of the book, he found a passage that had been lightly underlined in pencil. "And what is trust?" it read. "But the quiet belief that the other person is paying attention. Not to your performance, but to your truth. Not to the house you built, but to the home you are trying to make." Beneath the underlined passage, a library call card was tucked between the pages. It was an old-fashioned, stiff paper card, the kind that was being phased out in favor of digital systems. On it was a single call number, written in Ilara's precise architectural script. He felt a new sense of urgency. This was the next step. He took the card to the main information desk, where a young librarian was working. He handed it to her. She scanned it, frowned, and typed something into her computer. "This is an archival number," she said, "for the special collections. It's closed to the public at this hour." "I need to see it," Julian said, his old imperious tone returning. The librarian's expression hardened. "As I said, it's closed." Julian was about to argue, to demand to see her supervisor, to drop his own name, which usually opened any door in the city. But then he remembered the judge's words. "You would be wise to remember that." He stopped. He recalibrated. "Please," he said, the word feeling strange and new. "It's a matter of great personal importance. It concerns my wife." The librarian looked at him, her gaze assessing. She seemed to see the desperation beneath his expensive suit. "Wait here," she said, and disappeared into a back office. She returned a few minutes later with an older woman, the head archivist, a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her name tag read Ms. Albright. Julian's blood ran cold. "Albright? Are you related to Kenji Albright?" "He is my brother," she said, her voice dry as parchment. "Which makes me inclined to dislike you on principle. My brother has had a very bad day, and it seems you are the cause." Julian was speechless. The interconnectedness of Ilara's world was a web he was only just beginning to comprehend. "However," Ms. Albright continued, "I am also a professional, and I have instructions. Eleanor Vance made an appointment with me 3 days ago." She had used the name again, the reclamation. She told me a man presenting this call card would arrive this evening. She said to give him the item requested. She also said he would be arrogant and demanding, and that I should not be provoked. Julian felt a flush of shame. I apologize. Ms. Albright raised a single eyebrow. Apology noted. Come with me. She led him through a locked door and down a climate-controlled corridor into the heart of the archive. The air was cool and smelled of old paper and binding glue. It was a scent he remembered from his first meeting with Alara. She led him to a secure reading room and returned a moment later with a single, sealed manila envelope. It was surprisingly thick. My instructions are to give you this and to provide you with a secure, air-gapped laptop on which to view its contents. You have 1 hour. Then the drive inside must be returned to me. She placed the envelope on the table. On the front, in Alara's hand, was a single word. Attention. What is this? Julian asked. It is evidence, Ms. Albright said, her voice devoid of emotion. Alara, or Eleanor as she now prefers, has been a visiting researcher here for 6 months. She has been using our resources to conduct a forensic accounting of your firm. She is, and I do not say this lightly, one of the most meticulous and brilliant researchers I have ever encountered. What she has assembled is comprehensive. She gestured to the envelope. She called it the Archive of Inattention. She said you would understand. Julian looked at the word on the envelope. Attention. It was the thing he had failed to give her. It was the thing she had given to everything else, with a focus he was only now beginning to appreciate. Ms. Albright left him alone in the sterile, silent room. He broke the seal on the envelope. Inside was not a collection of papers, but a single, encrypted USB drive. He plugged it into the laptop she had provided. A password prompt appeared. There was no hint. He thought for a moment. He tried his own name. Access denied. He tried her name. Access denied. He tried Alber's Tower, Locus, the names of his greatest triumphs. Nothing. He felt a rising panic. He was at the heart of the maze, and he couldn't find the key. Then he stopped. He thought about the trail she had laid, the judge and the chess game, the pressed flower, the poem. This wasn't about him. It was about her. What would she choose? What was the one thing that was hers, that he had tried to take, that she was now reclaiming? He typed in a single word. Eleanor. Access granted. The drive opened to reveal a single, meticulously organized file system. The folders were labeled by project. The Kaito deal, the Dubai waterfront, the European headquarters. Inside each folder were subfolders: emails, financial records, timelines, audio files. It was a shadow history of his own company. He clicked on the Kaito folder first. It contained emails not from his own server, but from a private server Marcus Thorne had been using. Julian's blood went cold as he read them. Marcus had been communicating with a rival firm, feeding them information about the Kaito negotiations for months. But there was more. The projections he had given Kenji Albright, the ones Julian had signed off on, had been subtly inflated. The cost of materials, the timeline for completion, all of it had been manipulated to look more favorable, to a degree that was not just optimistic, but fraudulent. The audio files were recordings of phone calls, discreetly recorded by Alara. He heard Marcus's smooth, confident voice, promising their rivals that the Kaito deal would collapse, at which point the rival firm could sweep in with a more realistic and stable offer. He felt sick. He clicked on the Dubai folder. It was a similar story. Marcus had been cultivating a relationship with a junior member of the Sheikh's family, feeding him rumors about Julian's supposed creative overreach and the firm's financial instability. He was systematically undermining Julian's reputation, project by project. The final folder was the worst. It was labeled Keystone. It was their largest domestic project, a massive urban redevelopment plan set to be announced in the fall. The financial records Alara had unearthed were devastating. Marcus had set up a series of shell corporations. He had been siphoning money from the firm for over a year, redirecting funds designated for subcontractors into these accounts. The total was staggering, nearly $8 million. He had been bleeding the company dry from the inside, all while playing the role of the loyal, concerned number two. The call from Marcus earlier that day, the feigned panic, was a performance. He hadn't been worried about the firm. He had been probing, trying to find out how much Julian knew. Alara had found it all. She had followed the digital breadcrumbs, cross-referenced bank transfers, and pieced together a mosaic of betrayal that was breathtaking in its scope and audacity. She had done it alone, in quiet rooms like this one, while he was out accepting awards and giving speeches about his singular vision. He had been so focused on the view from the top of the tower, he had never thought to check the foundations. And Marcus had been drilling into them, getting ready to bring the whole thing down. It all clicked into place. Alara's departure wasn't just a personal act. It was a strategic necessity. She had the evidence, but if she had come to Julian with it, Marcus would have buried it, denied it, and painted her as a hysterical, vengeful wife. He would have used Julian's own perception of her against her. So she had to step away. She had to create a crisis so large, so undeniable, that Julian would be forced to look, to pay attention, to follow her trail to the truth. She was not destroying his company. She was trying to save it. She was protecting the innocent, the employees, the clients, the partners who had trusted them, who had trusted her. His hour was almost up. He saved a copy of the root directory onto a second encrypted drive Corbin had given him, a ghost drive that mirrored everything it touched. It was a breach of Ms. Albright's rules, but it was necessary. He then handed the original USB drive back to the archivist. She took it without a word. "Did you find what you were looking for?" she asked, her expression softening with something that looked almost like sympathy. "I found what she wanted me to find," he said. "Eleanor is a remarkable woman," Miss Albright said. "She sees the cracks in things, not to exploit them, but to understand if they can be mended." She paused. "She left one other thing for you, a final handoff." She gave him a small sealed envelope. Inside was not a clue, but a piece of paper with a single address written on it. It was for a place on the coast, 100 miles south. There was no name, no number, just an address. "Is she there?" Julian asked. "That is not for me to say," the archivist replied. "My role is complete. What you do now is up to you." He walked out of the library into the cold night air. The city felt like a foreign country. He had thought he was its master, but he had been a fool, blind to the currents of loyalty and betrayal moving just beneath the surface. He had a traitor in his midst and an ally he had cast aside. Marcus was not just a thief, he was a threat. He was trying to destroy the firm, likely to acquire its assets for pennies on the dollar through a proxy. He had to be stopped. But first, Julian had to get to the coast. He had to see her. The entire elaborate trail, the judge, the key, the archive, had been a re-education, a crash course in the world he had ignored. It had stripped away his arrogance and left him with a raw, humbling clarity. He finally understood that he couldn't fix this alone. He didn't have the knowledge or the strategy. She did. He had spent his life building structures. Now he had to learn how to build a bridge. He got into the car and gave the driver the address. The chase was no longer about finding her. It was about asking for her help. It was about, for the first time, admitting that he could not do it without her. The address led them down a winding coastal highway, the dark expanse of the ocean on one side, rolling hills on the other. The moon was a bright sliver in the sky, casting a pale metallic light on the water. They drove for nearly 2 hours, the silence in the car thick with unspoken tension. Julian watched the landscape change, the urban sprawl giving way to small, salt-weathered towns and long stretches of undeveloped coastline. He was moving further and further from his world, deeper into hers. The address was not for a house, but for a small, unmarked lane that branched off the main highway. The driver hesitated. "Are you sure about this, sir?" "Go on," Julian said. The lane was narrow and unpaved, winding through a grove of wind-swept cypress trees. After a quarter of a mile, it opened into a clearing. There, overlooking a small, secluded cove, was a house. It was not large or grand. It was a simple, modern structure of wood and glass designed to blend into the landscape rather than dominate it. It was low-slung, elegant, and perfectly sited to capture the light and the view. It was, Julian realized with a jolt, one of the most beautiful buildings he had ever seen, and he had never seen it before. A soft light glowed from within. He got out of the car and told the driver to wait back on the highway. As he approached the house, he saw that the front door was slightly ajar, an invitation. He stepped inside. The interior was a single open space, warm and filled with the scent of cedar and sea salt. The furniture was simple, comfortable, and well-made. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled not with art books, but with novels and histories and collections of poetry. A fire crackled in a minimalist hearth, and standing by the wall of glass that looked out over the dark ocean was Alara. She was not wearing a silk dress or expensive jewelry. She wore simple dark pants and a soft cashmere sweater the color of sea fog. Her hair was down and her feet were bare. She looked younger, more relaxed, and more herself than he had seen her in years. She did not seem surprised to see him. She simply turned from the window and watched him, her expression calm and neutral. "Hello, Julian," she said. Her voice was the same, but the acoustics around it were different. It was not a voice echoing in a cavernous penthouse, but one that belonged in this room, in this house. "Alara," he said. The name felt inadequate. "Eleanor." She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "You found the archive." It was a statement, not a question. "I did," he said. "Marcus." "Yes," she said, "for over a year. I suspected it 6 months ago. It took me this long to gather proof that would be irrefutable." "Why didn't you tell me?" The question was out before he could stop it, the old, wounded ego flaring up. Her gaze was steady. "Would you have believed me?" The honest answer was no. He would have seen it as an attack on his judgment. He had chosen Marcus. He had trusted Marcus. An accusation against Marcus would have been an accusation against him. "No," he admitted, the word a stone in his throat. "I would have defended him. I would have thought you were being emotional." "I know," she said without bitterness. "You see the world through the lens of loyalty to your own decisions. Marcus knew that. He counted on it. He was using your pride as a shield. To tell you would have been to arm him against me. So I had to create a circumstance where you would be forced to look at the raw data yourself, where you would have no choice but to believe the evidence of your own eyes." He looked around the room, at the quiet, confident beauty of the space. "This house, I've never seen it." "I know," she said. "I designed it. I bought the land 3 years ago with the money my grandmother left me. I hired a local builder. I oversaw every detail. It was my project. A place to be, not to perform." 3 years. She had been building her escape hatch for 3 years, right under his nose. He had been so consumed with his own work, his own world, that he had never once asked her what she did with her days, with her inheritance, with her time. He had just assumed she was arranging flowers or attending charity lunches. The sheer scale of his blindness was breathtaking. A structure is not a home. She had built herself a home while he was still building structures. "It's beautiful," he said, and he meant it. It was more than beautiful. It was true. It was a piece of architecture that was in harmony with its surroundings, that was built for a human being to live in. It was everything his own work was not. "Thank you," she said. "It's the first thing I've ever built entirely for myself." A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the sound of the fire and the distant rhythmic crash of the waves. What Marcus did, Julian began, his voice low. "It's not just theft. It's a systemic betrayal. He was trying to gut the firm, to destroy it." "He was trying to acquire it," she corrected him gently. "He has a silent partner, a private equity group known for hostile takeovers. The plan was to devalue the firm through the collapse of the Kaito and Dubai deals, trigger a crisis of confidence, and then have his partner acquire the company and its portfolio for a fraction of its worth. He would have been installed as the new CEO. You would have been left with nothing but a ruined reputation." Her clarity was like ice water. She had seen the entire strategy, not just the individual moves. While he had been playing checkers, she had been playing three-dimensional chess. "The archive," he said. "It's everything. It's irrefutable." "Yes," she said. "I made sure of it. But evidence is only as powerful as the strategy used to deploy it. If you go to the board now, Marcus will bog you down in lawsuits. He will leak stories to the press. He will turn it into a public war of attrition, and he will use the chaos to his advantage. He is expecting a direct confrontation." "Then what do we do?" he asked. The word "we" hung in the air between them. It was a question, not an assumption, a plea. She looked at him for a long time, her gaze searching. He did not look away. He let her see the ruin in him, the desperation, the dawning, terrifying humility. He had no more performances left. "You said we," she stated quietly. "I can't do this without you," he said. "I know that now. I was blind, Alara. Not just about Marcus, about everything. About you. I saw you as an accessory to my life. I never saw the life you were living, the work you were doing, the trust you were building, the person you are. I confused looking at you with seeing you." A single tear traced a path down her cheek. She did not wipe it away. It was the first crack in her serene composure. "Do you know how long I have waited to hear you say something like that?" she whispered. "Not the apology, the admission, the fact of it." "I know," he said, "and I am sorry for all of it." She took a deep breath, composing herself. "An apology is a start, but it isn't a solution. Marcus is still a threat. He thinks he's in control. He thinks I'm just a runaway wife and you're a panicked husband. He's underestimating us. That is our primary advantage." She walked over to a simple wooden desk in the corner. On it was a laptop, open to a complex flowchart. It was a war plan. "I had 2 scenarios mapped out," she explained, her voice all business now. "Scenario A was if you failed to follow the trail, or if you came here with anger and accusations. In that case, I would have anonymously leaked the archive to a financial journalist I trust and let the authorities handle it. The firm would have likely collapsed, but Marcus would have been exposed. It would have been messy, but necessary." She pointed to another branch of the flowchart. "This is scenario B, the one where you understood. The one where you came here ready to listen. She looked at him. We are now in scenario B. For the first time in days, Julian felt a flicker of something other than despair. It was hope, but a different kind of hope than he had ever known. It wasn't the arrogant confidence of a man who knew he would win. It was the quiet, fragile hope of a man who had been offered a second chance. "What's the plan?" he asked, moving to stand beside her, looking at the screen. "We don't go to the board. We don't go to the press. We don't even confront Marcus," she said, her finger tracing a line on the chart. "We dismantle his support structure from the outside in. Marcus has built his power on a series of promises he can't keep. Promises to his equity partner, promises to certain board members he's turned, promises to key employees. We are going to unravel those promises one by one before he even knows he's under attack." She pointed to a name. Kenji Albright. The Kaito deal is the linchpin. Marcus needs it to fail. We need it to succeed. You are going to call Albright. You are not going to command or demand. You are going to tell him the unvarnished truth about your own arrogance, about my role, and about the fraudulent projections Marcus created. You are going to offer him a new deal with corrected numbers, and you are going to offer me as the primary liaison and a guarantor of the project's integrity. Will he accept? Julian asked. His sister is the head archivist at the city library, Alara said with a faint smile. I believe she may have already put in a good word for me. She trusts evidence above all else. She continued down the list. There were 3 board members Marcus had swayed. For each, she had identified their specific vulnerability or desire. One wanted a legacy project. Another was concerned about the firm's ethical reputation. The third was purely motivated by financial gain. You will speak to each of them, she instructed. You will use Corbin to get them on a secure line. You will offer them what they want, but you will do it honestly. A new, non-profit design initiative for the Legacy Hunter. A fully transparent audit for the Ethics Hawk. And for the Money Man, she paused. You will show him the numbers from Marcus's shadow accounts and explain the criminal liability he would be exposed to as a co-conspirator. The strategy was brilliant. It wasn't a frontal assault. It was a series of precise, quiet conversations that would isolate Marcus, leaving him standing alone when he thought he was at the head of an army. And while you are doing that, she said, I will be talking to Marcus's equity partner. I know the managing director. I met him at a fundraiser for the museum. He prides himself on his reputation. He does not like surprises, and he does not like being associated with criminal fraud. I will present him with a simple choice. Walk away from Marcus cleanly and quietly, or become a named party in a federal investigation. It was a pincer movement, executed not with force, but with information and trust, the very things he had ignored. When do we start? He asked. Now, she said. We have, I estimate, less than 72 hours before Marcus realizes his position is compromised and tries something drastic. He's arranged for an emergency board meeting for Friday morning to force a vote of no confidence in you. We have to have all the pieces in place before then. She turned to face him fully. There's one more thing, Julian. If we do this, we do it as equals. No more pronouncements from on high, no more singular vision. We communicate, we listen, we build this strategy together. If you can't agree to that, I will revert to scenario A. I will protect the firm, but I will do it without you. He looked into her eyes, and for the first time, he saw her not as his wife, not as a victim or a puzzle, but as a partner, a formidable, brilliant partner. I agree, he said. And for the first time, a promise he made felt not like a transaction, but like a vow. The next 48 hours were a blur of controlled, focused action. They worked from the house on the coast, which Alara had equipped with a state-of-the-art secure communication system. It was their war room. Julian, for the first time in his professional life, took orders. Alara was the strategist, the general. He was her instrument. His first call was to Kenji Albright. It was the hardest call he had ever had to make. He followed Alara's instructions to the letter. He did not make excuses. He laid his own failings bare. "I was arrogant, Kenji," he said, the words feeling like ground glass in his mouth. "I took credit for work that was not mine alone. The trust you placed in our firm was, in truth, trust you placed in my wife, Alara. And I betrayed that. But the projections, they were more than just my arrogance. They were fraudulent. They were manipulated by my partner, Marcus Thorne, as part of a deliberate effort to sabotage the deal." He explained the whole situation, calmly, factually. He told Albright about the archive, about Marcus's plan, and then he made the offer. "I want to salvage this. We can present you with new, accurate projections within 12 hours. We can offer contractual guarantees against any further discrepancies. And the project will be managed directly by a new executive partner in our firm, Alara Croft. Your trust was in her. It's time our firm structure reflected that reality." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Julian could hear Albright breathing. He resisted the urge to fill the silence, to sell, to persuade. He just waited. "My sister called me an hour ago," Albright finally said. "She called you a fool, but she said you were a fool who might be capable of learning. And she said Eleanor was the most impressive mind she's encountered in a decade. Send me the new projections. And send me the proposal with Mrs. Croft's new title and responsibilities outlined. We will review it. No promises, Julian. But you have my attention." It was more than he had hoped for. One pillar of Marcus's plan was now unstable. Next came the board members. Corbin, working with uncanny speed, arranged the secure calls. Julian spoke to the legacy hunter, a man named Peterson. He didn't talk about profits. He talked about the firm's soul. He proposed the creation of the Alara Croft Initiative, a pro bono wing of the company dedicated to designing beautiful, functional spaces for communities in need, libraries, schools, clinics. "It's time we built things that matter, not just things that are loud," Julian said, using a phrase he had heard Alara use once. Peterson was intrigued. He spoke to the ethics hawk, a woman named Chen. He was brutally honest about the internal breach and the steps they were taking. He promised a full, independent audit and the establishment of a new, empowered ethics committee to be chaired by Chen herself. She listened, asked a series of sharp, incisive questions, and then said, "If what you say is true, you have my support in rooting out this cancer. But I will be watching, Julian, every step." The final board member, the money man, was the easiest and the most distasteful. His name was Wexler. Julian didn't waste time with appeals to morality. He had Corbin securely transmit a single page from the archive, a bank statement from one of Marcus's shell corporations, showing a payment made to a consulting firm owned by Wexler's brother-in-law. It was a kickback. "Marcus is going down, Wexler," Julian said, his voice cold as steel. "The only question is whether you go down with him. You have one chance to cooperate. Vote with me on Friday, and this document remains a private matter between us. Vote against me, and it becomes Exhibit A in a federal indictment." The man sputtered, then fell silent. The pillar had crumbled. While Julian was shoring up his defenses, Alara was on the offensive. She contacted the managing director of the private equity firm, a notoriously ruthless but pragmatic man named Sterling. She didn't threaten. She laid out the facts of Marcus's fraud with chilling precision, making it clear that she had irrefutable, time-stamped evidence. "Your firm has two options, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice calm and steady. "You can quietly withdraw your support for Mr. Thorne, citing a failure of due diligence on his part, and we can all move on. Or you can proceed, in which case you will be knowingly funding an acquisition based on criminal activity. I have already prepared a file for the SEC. The choice is yours." Sterling, a man who valued his reputation above all else, made the only logical choice. He cut Marcus loose. By Thursday afternoon, it was done. They had isolated him. Marcus was now standing on a platform with no supports, but he didn't know it yet. He still thought he was the one in control. "He'll be walking into that board meeting tomorrow morning, expecting to be crowned king," Julian said, a grim satisfaction in his voice. "And he'll find himself in a courtroom," Alara replied. She looked tired, but a new light shone in her eyes. The light of a battle well planned. Then, something unexpected happened. Corbin called, his voice more urgent than Julian had ever heard it. "He's not going to the meeting. He knows. Someone must have tipped him off." "Wexler," Julian spat. "He must have panicked and called Marcus." "It's possible," Corbin said, "but the result is the same. Marcus just cleared out his office. Not just his personal effects, everything. Hard drives, files, everything. And he's gone to ground." A cold dread washed over Julian. He has the Keystone Project files, the original plans, the contracts. He could set up a new firm overnight with that portfolio. "Worse," Alara said, her face pale. "Keystone has a key person clause. It's tied to him, not just the firm. He structured the deal that way. If he leaves and claims the firm is unstable, he can legally take the project with him. He's not running from a fight. He's executing a corporate decapitation. He's stealing the future of the company." This was Marcus's lateral surprise. He wasn't just a thief. He was a saboteur. The board meeting was a feint. His real plan was to burn the firm to the ground on his way out and rise from the ashes with its most valuable asset. "Where is he?" Julian demanded. "We're working on it," Corbin said. "He's using burner phones. His credit cards are dark. He's a ghost." "He'll need a place to work," Alara said, her mind already racing ahead. "He'll need infrastructure, a place to meet with the Keystone clients, to reassure them. He'll have a bolt hole prepared. Some are professional, but off the grid." "Corbin," Julian said, his voice a low command, "find him. Use whatever resources you need. I don't care what it costs." The clock was no longer ticking in days, but in hours. Marcus had to make contact with the Keystone developers within the next 24 hours to invoke the clause. They had to find him and neutralize him before he could make that call. The next few hours were the longest of Julian's life. He and Alara sat in the quiet house by the sea, the strategic flowchart on the screen now useless, and waited. The power had shifted again. It was no longer a game of chess. It was a manhunt. Julian paced the room like a caged animal. All his life, he had been the one in control, the one with the plan. Now, he was utterly helpless, waiting on a man he barely knew to find another man who had been his closest confidant. The irony was corrosive. Alara, by contrast, was still. She sat at the desk, methodically going through a digital copy of the firm's personnel files. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice raw with impatience. "I'm looking for a mistake," she said, not looking up. "Marcus is meticulous, but he's also arrogant. He believes he's the smartest person in any room. People like that always have a blind spot. Usually it's personal. A relationship, a habit, a place he feels safe. She cross-referenced names, dates, expense reports. She built a map of Marcus's life outside the office, the one he had kept hidden. An hour passed, then another. Julian felt his composure beginning to fray. Then, Alara's fingers stopped moving. "I think I have something," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the tension in the room. She pointed to the screen. For the past 2 years, Marcus has had a consultant on a monthly retainer, a woman named Sophia Reyes. The payments are coded as strategic research, but her address is a residential high-rise, and her degree is in art history. Julian frowned. "So, he's having an affair." "Maybe," Alara said. "But look at this." She pulled up another file. Sophia Reyes was the registered agent for a holding company. That company owned a single property, a small, private office suite in a discreet building downtown, 2 blocks from the firm. The suite was leased under a different corporate name. The payments were made from an offshore account that Alara, through her months of research, had already linked to Marcus. "It's his bolt hole," Julian breathed. "His shadow office." "He paid for it with the money he was stealing from us," Alara said, a grim look on her face. The arrogance. She immediately relayed the information to Corbin. "He's there," Corbin confirmed 10 minutes later. "My man on the ground has eyes on the building. He's in the suite. Lights are on. He's not alone. He's with his lawyer." "He's preparing to make the call to the Keystone Group," Julian said. "He's getting his legal justification in order." "We have to stop him," Alara said. "But not with force. Corbin's people can't go in. That would be illegal. We'd lose all leverage." Julian's mind raced. He thought of the phone calls he had made, the alliances he had rebuilt, not through power, but through honesty. The clock was running out. Marcus was minutes away from making a call that would cripple them. He needed to buy time. He needed to consume the clock. "Get me the lead developer for Keystone on the phone," Julian said to Alara. "Now." "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to do the one thing he won't expect," Julian said. "I'm going to make a promise I can actually keep." Alara got the developer, a man named Henderson, on a secure line. "Mr. Henderson," Julian said, his voice calm and authoritative, but without its old arrogance. "This is Julian Croft. I know you are expecting a call from Marcus Vaughan. I am asking you not to take it. He has resigned from my firm under a cloud of criminal investigation for fraud. He will try to invoke the key person clause to steal the Keystone project. It will be a lie." "Mr. Croft," Henderson said, his voice wary, "Thorne has been our primary contact. He says the firm is collapsing." "He is the one who tried to collapse it," Julian said. "I have proof, which I will deliver to you in person within the hour. But for now, I need you to trust me. The firm is stable, but the project is at risk if it stays with him. He no longer has our resources, our engineers, our talent. He has nothing but a stolen file. I am on my way to you now. Just give me 1 hour." Henderson hesitated. "I know my word has not meant much recently," Julian said, the admission costing him dearly. "But my wife, Alara Croft, is now an executive partner in this firm. She is joining me on this project. Her word is her bond, and she guarantees its successful completion." He looked at Alara, who nodded, giving him the strength to continue. 1 hour, Henderson, before you burn a bridge to the most respected architectural firm in the country to follow a con man into a legal swamp. There was a pause. 1 hour, Croft, Henderson said, but that's all you get. Julian hung up. "Corbin, did you hear that?" "Loud and clear," Corbin's voice came back. "He's still in the office with his lawyer. They're drafting the official notice." "Good," Julian said. He then had Alara connect him to a series of other numbers. He called the head of the city's planning commission. He called a journalist at the most respected financial paper, a man he had always kept at arm's length, but who was known for his integrity. To each, he gave a carefully worded, partial version of the truth, enough to create a web of questions and official inquiries that would greet Marcus the moment he tried to make his move. He was preemptively bogging Marcus down in the very bureaucracy he had hoped to use against Julian. It was a clock consumption gambit, buying them precious minutes. Finally, he called the one person he knew could stop Marcus cold. He called Marcus's wife. He had Corbin find her number. It felt like a violation, a terrible crossing of a line. "Julian?" he asked, looking at Alara. She met his gaze. Her expression was hard, but she nodded. "He weaponized our life. Use what you must. Protect the firm." He made the call. A woman answered, her voice tired. "Mrs. Thorne," Julian said gently. "This is Julian Croft. I am so sorry to be calling you, but your husband is about to do something that will destroy his life and cause immense harm to many innocent people. I believe he is at a private office downtown. I believe he is with his lawyer. He is about to commit a crime. You may be the only person who can talk him out of it." He gave her the address. He didn't mention the affair. He didn't need to. He simply planted the seed of doubt and fear. He heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end, then a dial tone. "Now we wait," Julian said. They didn't have to wait long. 20 minutes later, Corbin's voice came over the speaker, calm and final. "It's over. The lawyer just left the building. Alone. He looked furious. 10 minutes after that, Marcus came out. He looked defeated. He got into a cab. He's gone." "What about his wife?" Alara asked. "She never showed up," Corbin said. "But my man on the ground says Marcus was on the phone for the last 10 minutes he was in there. He was shouting. Then, silence. Whatever she said to him, it broke him." Julian felt a wave of relief so profound it almost buckled his knees. They had won. Not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a series of quiet, precise moves. With information, with trust, and with a strategy built by the woman he had almost lost. "Where is he now?" Julian asked. "He took the cab to a motel out by the airport," Corbin said. "A cheap one, the kind you pay for in cash." Julian looked at Alara. His first instinct was to go there, to confront Marcus, to see the man who had betrayed him in his diminished state. He wanted the satisfaction of the final, victorious moment. But then he looked at Alara's face. She was not triumphant. She was just weary. "Let him go, Julian," she said softly. "The system will take care of him now. We have work to do. We have a firm to rebuild." He realized she was right. The desire for that final confrontation was a part of his old self, the self that needed to dominate, to win publicly. The new self, the one that was tentatively emerging, understood that the true victory was not in seeing his enemy fall, but in having something worthy of rebuilding. "You're right," he said. "Corbin, stand your man down. Let him go." "Understood," Corbin said. "It was a pleasure working with you again, Julian. And with you, Mrs. Croft." The line went dead. They stood in the quiet of the house by the sea. The crisis was over. The traitor had been vanquished. The firm was safe. But the silence that filled the room was not one of victory. It was the silence of a vast, uncertain space opening up before them. "So what now?" Julian asked. Alara walked to the window and looked out at the ocean. "Now," she said, "we begin the real work. Rebuilding is harder than building. You have to honor what was there before, even the broken parts." The formal process is concluded with a quiet, administrative finality. Marcus Thorne, faced with the mountain of evidence Alara had compiled, surrendered without a fight. His lawyers negotiated a settlement where he relinquished all claims to the Keystone Project and paid back a significant portion of the stolen funds in exchange for the firm not pursuing criminal charges. The SEC, alerted by Sterling's private equity firm, launched its own investigation that would likely bar him from the industry for life. He was neutralized, a ghost in the world he had tried to conquer. The board meeting on Friday morning was not a battle, but a coronation. With the Kaido deal back on track and the Keystone Project secured, Julian's position was unassailable. He walked them through the events of the week, not as a victor, but as a chastened leader. He gave Alara full credit for uncovering the fraud and for crafting the strategy that saved them. He then formally proposed her appointment as Chief Strategy Officer and Executive Partner. The vote was unanimous. Chen and Peterson became her staunchest allies. Wexler, chastened and silent, voted yes without meeting Julian's eye. The estranged partners began to return. Kenji Albright flew in from Tokyo to sign the new contracts himself. He met with Julian and Alara in the firm's main conference room. He spoke to Julian with polite formality, but when he spoke to Alara, he bowed his head slightly. "My company is honored to be in business with you, Croft-san," he said to her. "Your integrity is a rare commodity." The firm, which had been on the brink of collapse, was suddenly stronger than ever. The crisis had forced a necessary purification. The culture began to shift. The old top-down, fear-based motivation that Julian had fostered was replaced by a new sense of collaborative purpose, championed by Alara. She didn't make grand speeches, she just listened. She moved through the office, holding quiet conversations, asking questions, and empowering the talented people who had long been overlooked. The soul of the company, which had been dormant, began to stir. 2 months later, Julian was invited to speak at the annual Architectural Forum, the same event where he had delivered the speech that had begun the entire unraveling. It was the most prestigious stage in their profession. His team had prepared a soaring speech for him about resilience and the future of design, full of the old, confident rhetoric. The night before the event, he threw it away. He walked onto the stage in front of 2,000 of his peers. The lights were just as hot, the expectation just as palpable, but he was a different man. He walked to the podium, set his single note card down, and looked out at the crowd. "Good evening," he began, his voice quiet, unamplified by his usual booming confidence. "My name is Julian Croft, and for most of my life, I have been a liar." A shocked silence fell over the massive auditorium. "Not in a criminal sense," he continued, "but in a more personal and perhaps more damaging way. I have built a career on the idea of the singular vision, the master architect, the lone genius, and I have allowed the world to believe it. I have actively encouraged the world to believe it. The truth is, my best work, my most important insights, were never mine alone." He paused, and his eyes found Alara in the front row. She was watching him, her expression unreadable, but her presence a solid, grounding force. "There is a difference between a structure and a home," he said, the words now a part of his own DNA. "Structures are about ego. They are loud. They are monuments to the people who build them. Homes are about people. They are quiet. They are vessels for a life. For 10 years, I had the privilege of living with the finest architect I have ever known, an architect of homes, of connections, of trust. And I was so busy building my own monuments that I never saw the work she was doing. I didn't just fail to acknowledge her contributions. I erased them. I took her insights and called them my own." He looked directly at the audience, his gaze sweeping across the faces of the most powerful people in his industry. "Her name is Alara Croft. She is my wife, and she is now the Chief Strategy Officer of my firm. But more than that, She is its moral compass. She was the one who saw the rot in our foundations when I was admiring the view from the penthouse. She was the one who had the courage and the brilliance to save us from my own blindness. The Albers Tower, the project I claimed as my own, was a hollow victory. The work we are doing now, the work of rebuilding our firm on a foundation of integrity and shared credit, is the only project I have ever been a part of that feels truly sound. He didn't wait for applause. He simply said, "Thank you," and walked off the stage. The silence held for a moment longer, and then it was broken by a wave of applause that was different from any he had ever heard. It was not the rapturous adoration he had once craved. It was quieter, more thoughtful. It was the sound of respect. The reconciliation was not a single moment of forgiveness. It was a slow, ongoing process, as deliberate and methodical as the construction of one of his buildings. Alara did not move back into the penthouse. The cavernous, empty space was a monument to a life that no longer existed. They sold it. They kept the house on the coast, and Alara found a small, modest apartment in the city for the days she needed to be at the office. She did not say, "I forgive you." Forgiveness felt too simple, too final. It was a closing of a chapter. What she was interested in was a new book entirely. One evening, months after the forum, they were sitting on the deck of the coastal house, watching the sun set over the ocean. "You did a brave thing," she said, referring to his speech. "I did an honest thing," he corrected her. It was long overdue. They sat in a comfortable silence for a while. "This," he said, gesturing to the two of them, to the quiet space between them, "can this be rebuilt?" She turned to look at him. The setting sun caught the silver in her dark hair. "I don't think we can rebuild what was, Julian. That structure was flawed from the beginning. It was built on a false premise, on your power and my silence." His heart sank. "But," she continued, a faint smile touching her lips, "we might be able to build something new, from the ground up, on a new foundation." "What would that foundation be?" he asked. "Honesty," she said. "Shared work and attention, real attention, paid every day." She looked at him, her gaze clear and direct. "We have a year, a trial period. No promises, no assumptions. Let's see what we can build in a year, as partners." It was not the grand romantic reunion he might have once imagined. It was better. It was real. It was conditional, earned, and unsentimental. It was a blueprint. He reached out and took her hand. Her fingers curled around his, a quiet acceptance. "Okay," he said. "A year. Let's see what we can build." He looked out at the horizon, where the last sliver of sun was disappearing into the water. The world was vast and uncertain, but for the first time, he did not feel the need to conquer it, or to build a monument against its emptiness. He was content to sit here, in this house she had built, and feel its foundation beneath him. A structure is not a home, but he was beginning to learn, with her as his architect, how to build one. It was a quiet beginning, but it was a solid one, and for now, that was more than enough.